Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of Head On. Here on Vancouver Island, we have a lot of writers, we have aspiring writers, we have many successful authors, but how do you go from a concept to actually a published book that you're taking through the checkout at Amazon or Chapters? Well, here to help us navigate the literary highway, we have a very special guest tonight. Welcome to Elinor Florence.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
She is a best-selling author in not only Canada, but your books are also sold in Europe and the US and the UK. And you might wonder why Elinor is dressed so exquisitely this evening. Well, she's actually a time traveler. She's come to us from World War II, that era where her books are actually set. Elinor, we just want to say that congratulations on being a published author. 2 successful books to your credit. That's tremendous. So many of us dream about writing a book. Like I've thought about writing a book, and so far I've got the page numbers down. But for someone like yourself to take the concept to through the publishing process to the market is very, very commendable. So good for you for doing what most of us would love to do, but just haven't had the chops to do it.
Thank you.
So, my time traveler, take us back to your childhood where actually the ideas for these books were born. And let's start there.
Well, I came by my interest in World War II, honestly, I think, because after my dad, who was in the RCAF, came home after the war, he purchased an unused wartime airfield. It had some serviceable buildings on it. I don't know, perhaps you can show the photograph.
Yes, I think we have a photograph of that building. Black and white photo of the old Air Force Base. There it is, Elinor.
Yes, so it's a T-shaped barracks building, and it was cut at the junction, and the back half went into the town of North Battleford and became the Mennonite Church, which it is to this day, and the front half was converted into my family home. So I actually grew up on a wartime airfield 8 miles outside of North Battleford in a barracks building.
Wow. And I think we have a picture of the childhood home and the part of the barracks building. The second photograph there, Dax, the little white house. There we go.
Yes, my parents transformed it into a home, but that is still the original wartime airport building with the original windows and doors and shingled exterior.
Wow.
And my brother took over the family farm, so I can still go home and sleep in my own bed in my own bedroom to this day. And he put up a sign on the farm a couple of years ago just to commemorate the farm's history.
Wow, there it is there, Elinor.
Yeah, just to honor the fact that the farm was a part of the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. So it wasn't that we grew up talking about the war every day, but from a young age we were conscious of the fact that our farm had helped win the war.
Wonderful. That's amazing. So Bird's Eye View was your first book, Elinor. And for anybody who hasn't read this book, it is a tremendous read. This will appeal to all readers of all ages, and it's a rollicking, very interesting, very meticulously researched story about a little known part about World War II, the aerial photographer interpreters, of which your protagonist, Rose, a prairie girl, went over to volunteer with the British auxiliary, and she became an expert at aerial photography interpretation. So walk us through exactly what it was that Rose did and how this book came to be.
I knew that I wanted to write a novel about a Canadian woman in uniform because they have been hiding their light under a bushel, I think. There were 50,000 Canadian women in uniform in World War II, but you never hear anything about what they did. The reason I had Rose go overseas and join the British Air Force first is because for the first 2 years, Canada wouldn't allow women to join up. Later that changed, and Rose transfers into the Royal Canadian Air Force Women's Division once she gets over to England. But she works for a little-known branch of British intelligence called photo interpretation, and those were the people who studied the black and white aerial photographs coming back from the continent with their magnifying glasses, and they were looking for camouflaged factories, troop movements, bomb targets, essentially, anything that would help the Allies. And of course, my heroine Rose, being from Saskatchewan and Canadian and all those good things, she has a gift for it, and she makes many significant discoveries in the book. book.
Tremendous. And you have to understand when you're reading this book, I mean, they're looking at black and white photographs taken from, a very great height at some times. And it was the Spitfires and the bomber crews that would go out with the film on their aircraft to take these reconnaissance photos. So, targets could be planned. And also they would go in afterwards to see if they actually did what the target was supposed to do exactly. So they did the reconnaissance and also post-bombing.
Bomb damage assessment.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I love what you have, how you portray it in the book, Elinor. It says, the way you've written it, like Rose, when she's looking at these photographs, the buildings are the size of punctuation marks. These are tiny little images in a big black and white photograph. They didn't have color then. And I like the way you described like what a railway would look like as opposed to a river, as opposed to a roadway. So the roadways were angled because they'd have right angles where intersections were, and the railways were curved, and the rivers had bridges across them, and those are key points in the story.
It was a very meticulous job. It required hours and hours of study. I like to say the interpreters were looking at 50 Shades of Grey, because that's basically what the photographs were composed of. Women were particularly good at it. They had the attention to detail that the men didn't have. More than half of the interpreters were young women.
In fact, there's a quote in your book about that. It says they chose women to be these aerial photography interpreters because they had the patience of Job and the skills to darn socks.
Exactly.
And I thought that was so interesting for 1939, 40s that we'd be portrayed that way. But a very, very important skill that Rose came to master in this book, and there's some really good surprises. This book will appeal to anybody who's interested in the RAF, in the bombing squads. It'll appeal. There's a love story in here, which you've woven in very nicely.
She is surrounded by handsome men in uniform, so how could there not be a love story?
Exactly. A very Canadian thing as well, because there were so many war brides that came back after the war.
And like all the Canadians who were over there, she's desperately homesick. And so throughout the book, I have her mom writing her letters from the home front, telling her what's going on back in Canada during the war as well. So it's a very Canadian perspective on World War II.
Very Canadian. And I think that's such a nice aspect to your book, is that every one of these chapters contains these letters from home that are being exchanged with her family. And there's another beautiful part in there where it's late in the war, everybody's war weary, and she goes back to her room one night and she takes out this little tin, and inside the tin is this rich black earth from her farm, and she just takes that and breathes that in and just feels, I just want home, I just want home. And I just love the way you've woven these little nuggets in like that.
Thank you.
And there's so many very interesting parts about the war that I had no clue about, and I think that's because a lot of this was still under this Official Secrets Act, that some of this information wasn't let out till of late?
Yes, that's true. Recently, most people have heard about the code breakers at Bletchley Park because of the movie The Imitation Game and the TV show Bletchley Circle. But the photo interpreters, in my view, were doing a more interesting job looking at photographs, and yet we don't hear so much about them.
No. Tremendous. So, Elinor, from this book, Bird's Eye View, which is a bestseller here in Canada, congratulations.
Thank you.
Then you started a blog because you went on tour and started meeting a lot of people and a lot of veterans, and a lot of really interesting stories started to come to your doorstep. So tell us about the blog and how that blog led to your second book.
I realized that I interviewed a number of veterans, especially women veterans, when I was researching Bird's Eye View. And so before this book was published, I realized I had masses of information, and I decided to start publishing their nonfiction, their true stories, on my own website. So I created a blog called Wartime Wednesdays, and I have published interviews with veterans. Since the book was published, the blog has kind of taken on a life of its own, and I've found more people and interviewed more people. Anyway, I took 28 of my best interviews with veterans and self-published them into this most recent book, which just came out 2 weeks ago.
So that's just being launched this month in September. Well,
yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And that's in very nice time too for Remembrance Day coming up, a lovely gift to give to veterans or family of veterans. And I understand there was some urgency in publishing this second book. You want to tell us about that?
As you know, there are no World War II veterans left under the age of 90, so they're all in their 90s now. They're disappearing quite rapidly. In fact, I'm feeling a sense of urgency about talking to several people before it's too late. I knew that if I waited to find a traditional publisher for this book, it might take too long. 13 of the 28 veterans I interviewed are still living, and I wanted them to have the book in their hands. And so I just went ahead and self-published.
Wonderful. That's beautiful. And you also took, respect for the veterans and the age they are, you also took great pains to make sure that the print was larger in this book as well.
Not just for them, but for my age group as well. I'm finding that I put off by very fine print, so I told my designer I wanted the font to be large and spaced out, and as well there's more than 100 photographs in the book, color photographs too, so it's quite an attractive book to read.
It's a beautiful, beautiful book. So Elinor, you're what we call a hybrid author because you have been published by one of the big publishing houses here in Canada, Dundurn Publishing in Toronto, with your first book, Bird's Eye View, and as you just mentioned, you self-published your second book. So let's talk a little bit about the process. What's the relationship between a publisher and an author? How do you take your concept and, in fact, let's just backtrack a bit. Let's talk a bit about the writing process. Are you a really disciplined writer, or you wait for inspiration, or do you type at a computer, longhand? What's your process?
I type at a computer. I'm very disciplined. I work from 9 to 5. I keep office hours when I'm writing and researching. I don't think there really is such a thing as a successful author who waits for inspiration to strike. It is a labor of love, but emphasis on the labor. You really have to sit down and make yourself do it whether you feel like it or not. And it is so much work to create a book-length manuscript that you have to give up a lot. You have to give up all hobbies, for example, a lot of your family time and so forth for months, if not years.
Wow. Jack London once said, if you wait for, you can't wait for inspiration, you have to chase it down with a club.
Exactly.
And you're demonstrating that here. So by the time you have your draft finished, for example, for this book, how many years or months was that in the process for Bird's Eye View?
Well, it was definitely years, but then I started working on it when I still had children at home, so I would put it away and take it out and put it away and take it out. Eventually, when I finished the draft, I sent it to Dundurn Press in Toronto because I knew that they had a special interest in Canadian history. Okay. And I was very fortunate that the first publisher I sent it to accepted it. However, from the time I mailed it to them and the time it appeared in print was 2.5 years. Wow. So it is a very lengthy process. Publishers have a number of slots available for books, and you're competing for those slots with, hundreds of other authors. And even if they like your book, they may not slot it in until a year from now or 2 years from now even.
Wow. Wow. So Dundurn accepted it. Congratulations, your first publisher. That's very uncommon with first authors. That's amazing. And so you went and met to Toronto and met with them and contracted with them. Now, does part of that, do you get a book advance when you sign on with a publisher? How does that work?
As a first-time publisher, I received a small advance, $750. An advance isn't a purchase price, it's an advance against future sales. So you have to earn out your advance before you start making royalties on subsequent sales. Now, book writing is not a lucrative proposition. I signed a standard first-time contract, which meant that my royalties are 8%. So the balance at 92% remaining of the sale price is split between the publisher and the bookstore, but the author gets maybe if I were a more established author, I could have cut a better deal and gotten 15 or 20%, but basically you will not get rich selling books in Canada because a best-selling book is only 5,000 copies. So if you're making a couple of dollars a book, that's $10,000.
Right. That's very good to know for any aspiring authors, that this is, don't quit your day job.
No.
Yeah. And don't keep waiting for inspiration.
Exactly.
Get out your club and keep your job. Yes. So in terms of printing the book then, they do all of that. Who determines the cover art, the back cover art, the spine? Do you have say in that, Elinor, as the author, or how's that determined?
In this case, I did. Dundurn allowed me to work with a designer to create the cover. It was kind of funny, though, because they said they wanted a cover that was equally appealing to both men and women. And after a couple of days, my designer phoned and said, there's no such thing. If I put a woman's face on the cover, the guys won't read it. If I put a big Lancaster aircraft on it, the women won't read it. But I think he did a good job of marrying the two elements.
Dax, if you can just put up the picture of bird's eye view for a second. I just want to show viewers the what she means with the Lancaster on the plane and the... That's a beautiful cover.
Thank you.
Yeah, gorgeous book, really nicely done.
Yes, so Dundurn assumes all the costs of printing the book and distributing it to bookstores.
Okay, so the marketing of it, book tours, book signings, what's the publisher's role in that, and what's your role?
The author does everything. Maybe if you're Margaret Atwood, you know, you'll have a publicist who helps you with those things, but I don't know any authors whose publishers have helped them with that. The marketing is your responsibility. So I send out my own press releases, I call chapters and set up my own book signings. Fortunately, I'm comfortable doing that. I know a number of authors who are very uncomfortable with that and they hate it, but I kind of enjoy it.
Well, and your outfit too, your 40s very glam outfit with your V for Victory pin, which I understand is an authentic pin from World War II. Fantastic. When you're out marketing your book, you're looking like this. Yeah. You are the time traveler with the bird's eye view. And that's a real eye catcher. I think that's a very important part of the marketing strategy that you have, Elinor, and I think that's what's helped make this a bestseller. So very smart.
Well, people always do a double take. Sometimes I think they just think I'm a crazy hat lady, and I have to assure them that I'm actually in costume.
Yeah. Or they think they are doing a time travel somewhere themselves. Very good. So that's how working with a publishing house, sort of the generalities of it. Let's talk about self-publishing then. So it's a beautifully designed book. Again, a lovely cover photo. If we can just get a photo of that, Dax, the My Favorite Veterans book, just show our viewers. It's a beautiful photo. So that was all your say. You got to have full say, obviously, in
I hired the same designer, Harrison McKay, who's based here on the island, to do both covers, and I think he did an excellent job of the cover and laying out the inside of the book and working with all the photographs I provided.
And how long did, like this one was 2.5 years to get to market? How long was that one, Elinor, with your self-publishing?
It probably took me 3 or 4 months. I had all the stories written already. I just extracted them from my website, but it still took a bit of time to manipulate everything and prepare the photographs for publication. There were some other aspects of self-publishing that I wasn't aware of. I had to apply for an ISBN number. That's an International Standard Book Number, which every book that's published carries.
You'll find inside each book.
Yes.
Great. Okay.
And also the library cataloging information on the inside. I had to apply for that from Library and Archives Canada.
Is there a cost associated with that? No. Okay. Yeah.
I had to go out for quotes from various printers and find a printer that I thought was going to do the best job for me. I chose Blitz Print in Calgary to do this one, but there are many printers on the island who are equally as good. So it was quite a process, and then even just learning, the book is only available from me because it's self-published. It won't appear in bookstores. So anybody can email me or call me if they want a book. I also put it on Amazon, which means that I sent books physically to Amazon's outlets, the Canadian outlet in New Westminster and their US outlet in Texas, so that people can order online from Amazon as well.
So you physically have to box those up and ship them to Amazon,
Yes.
whereas with your publishing house, they sent them to Amazon UK, Amazon Germany, Amazon US. They looked after all of that for
Yes.
you. They just sent you your royalty check once a year.
Yes.
Yes. That's pretty amazing. Now, if you want to get onto Elinor's website and look at her Wartime Wednesdays, you can actually sign up for that too. It's a fascinating story she has on there. And new stories are always coming in, of course, with the book tours that she does. And now with the launch of My Favorite Veterans, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who have a lot of interest in getting their stories told.
Thank you.
And checking to see if their father or brother, has some interesting history that they've never heard of either.
Choosing the title was interesting. I kicked around a number of, generic titles like Stories from World War II, and then finally I thought, these are 28 of my favorite people in the world, and so I just thought I'll call it My Favorite Veterans and leave it at that.
Oh. Now, the veterans on the cover have a Vancouver Island connection on your My Favorite Veterans book, and I believe we have a picture of the couple,
Starkey and Tony Edwards.
Starkey and Tony Edwards. We have a picture of them as they appear now, Elinor, and that's their wedding picture on the cover.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about them.
Well, Starkey Edwards grew up in Battleford, Saskatchewan, but he stayed in the Air Force after World War II and retired to Comox many years ago, I think about 25 years ago, because he's 95 now, I think, 94. And he was a fighter ace in World War II, and just to give you a description of what an ace is a guy who shot down 5 enemy aircraft. Starkey shot down 18 confirmed, and several unconfirmed as well. So he is a venerated hero in Canadian aviation and military circles.
Wow.
He and his wife Tony, who is also an RCAF veteran, and I wanted to use the picture of the couple because I wanted to honor both men and women. And Tony, of course, because Starkey is so famous, doesn't get as much recognition. She's comfortable with that, but I wanted to make sure that people knew that she also had volunteered and served her country in wartime.
Very nice. I like how you're honoring both of them like that. And they live here on the island. Yes. And with your launch of this book, you are personally delivering this to as many of the veterans in this book as possible. Yes. And I think that's a very beautiful thing. That must just be so heartwarming for them to see their stories in print at this late stage of their lives. And that you're doing a real service too. You're capturing a lot of Canadian history that would otherwise be lost. So you're a national treasure, Elinor.
Oh, thank you.
It's wonderful what you've done here to bring this history so to life for us and so readable and enjoyable. It's going to cross all genres, all age groups. These are wonderful books. So I'm just so pleased that you're here, a Qualicum Beach author.
I'd like to just ask your viewers to, if you have a veteran in your family whose story hasn't been written yet, please find somebody in your family to interview that person and write it down before it's too late. And if you don't have anybody, hire somebody. There are people available who will come and interview your loved ones. I know some families have passed the hat to raise enough money to hire a videographer or a writer to come and record their family's stories for posterity. It's so important.
That's a really, really good reminder. Thank you very much. We're losing these national treasures day by day, and with Remembrance Day coming up in November, I think that's a wonderful reminder for families while you can. So, Elinor, thank you for walking us through, very briefly, your journey to get Bird's Eye View published, your blog, which resulted in your lovely second book, My Favorite Veterans. I think we've learned a lot tonight, and for any aspiring authors out there, the literary highway is paved with a lot of hope. There are a lot of potholes and pitfalls, and as Elinor says, don't quit your day job. But I think it's a labor of love. If you can't not write if you're a writer. So we wish you all the best in promoting My Favorite Veterans, and we'll maybe have you back on the show for who knows what your third book might be.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us for Head On. If you have any comments or questions or topic ideas for future shows, please contact Melissa Hall. Her email will be at the bottom of the screen here. And we will see you next time on Head On. Thanks for joining us tonight.